Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this event. Digital Europe has been running several events on privacy and of course of the implementation and enforcement of GDPR. This time we'll talk about next stop for the one-stop shop, which is the mechanism that would allow us to basically align across country the use of GDPR, and for companies and institutions to deal with one enforcer and not 28. We could also say more than that. I just learned that just Germany also has 18 different agencies. So let us look at what the status is at the moment. Next slide, please. So what is the one-stop shop? It is the center of GDPR enforcement along with cooperation and consistency mechanism. It allows a lead authority to basically do cross-border processing based on the main establishment. So does this actually work? It should allow us basically to work with one authority. But it has lately been quite criticized that it's too lengthy, it's too slow. Does it actually work? And other countries have been challenging that they want to go ahead with proceedings as this is taking too long. So let's jump to the next slide. We have also seen a ruling that has allowed exceptions to the rule. So in specific cases, actually the non-lead can actually also take action. Is this watering out the mechanism? And can we still maintain that consistency and enforcement? Definitely we know that when we look at our study, the latest study done on scaling in Europe, we have learned that for SMEs, one of the biggest obstacles of growth is the fragmented implementation of, amongst others, GDPR and other regulatory disharmonization in the internal market. So will this actually water out that right to actually dealing with one authority? We also see that fines are being given, 1.2 billion, but will we be able to keep that consistent enforcement mechanism? Will we allow companies only to deal with one? And is there enough resources basically for some of the smaller companies basically to be able to deliver what they should deliver? Or do we need some kind of different resourcing mechanism? Do they need more support? Do we need to have more how can you say, more consistent resources across different countries to support the lead authority? Do we need that one-stop shop at all? Is it now watered out by the ruling? So the big question of today is, does the one-stop shop need to be strengthened or to be fixed or totally refurbished in the mechanism that it is now? I think we can say from an industry point of view, we definitely support that there is this one-stop shop mechanism. And we do believe that a strengthening of this mechanism would be a very, very good idea. And can we actually make sure that we, through the European Data Protection Board, basically supply more resources to the processes so they become more agile? We need to be patient, but not over patient, and we need to resource accordingly. But the big discussion with many different views of today is, what do we do from here? I want to thank all our speakers. We have an extremely fantastic lineup of people speaking today. We have Renate Nikolay from the head, she's the head of cabinet from Vice President Jourová and very experienced in privacy. We have the head of the European Data Protection Supervisor, Wojciech, Wiewiórowski. We have Axel Voss, who is a member of the European Parliament from EP. And we have Mr. Karadjov, Chairman of the Bulgarian Commission for Personal Data Protection, Ursula Pachl from the Deputy Director for BEUC, the consumer organization, and Mr. Malgary, the co-director of Brussels Privacy Hub, and Scott Marcus, Senior Fellow of BEUC, also present in our last event, and Cecilia Alvarez, EMEA Privacy Policy Director from Facebook. So an impressive lineup of many different views, and I really wish you a very good discussion here, and I will hand over to Alberto to facilitate the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and thank you for the introduction and also the introduction to the panel. As you said, an impressive list of speakers, so I'll go straight to the discussion. Just some housekeeping before we do that. We'll try to make the discussion as interactive as possible, so I'll be asking direct questions of the panelists, and I'll ask them to be as brief as they can, so that we can also try and have a Q&A with the audience. And I would encourage the audience to already start typing questions in the Q&A box as they listen to the interventions, so that I can select in the final part of our event. When you ask your question, please do identify yourself, state your name and affiliation, so that we know who the question is coming from. So I'll go to, obviously, noblesse oblige, the commission first. We have Renate, who has tremendous experience, not only in fundamental rights, but also trade with the commission and the diplomatic service, a tremendous career. Very privileged to have her here for this discussion. And to ask you the first question, I need to go back to the GDPR review from the commission from last year. In the section on the one-stop shop and consistency mechanism, the commission states that it is effectively too early to assess how well these mechanisms are functioning, and that developing what I think is one of the ultimate goals identified in that communication, developing a truly common European data protection culture, will require, among other things, making fuller use of the tools that the GDPR provides, and also avoiding lowest common denominator type of situations. Now, provided it's too early, but how long do you think this process will last? How long do you think it will take? Are you encouraged by what you've seen from the DPAs since that review was adopted last year?
Thank you so much, Alberto, for having me. And, I think the review and what we said in the review is indeed still kind of valid. It is early days to kind of, already say, oh, we should kind of stop the one-stop shop. It doesn't work. It's something totally new. We should not forget where we came from. We came from a totally fragmented situation where we had 20 years of experience with the data protection directive, but which was implemented in pretty much parallel universes in the different member states. The promise of the GDPR, in particular for the business world, but also for the individuals, was that there would be a one law for one continent. And the one-stop shop is the answer to that kind of, promise in the enforcement saga. But indeed, there is no reason for complacency. There is a lot of things to do. I see the jurisprudence of the court as a wake-up call also to get our act together and to show that we can deliver on the one-stop shop. But what I've been seeing ever since we have made the review last year is actually promising signals. Just to name a couple of them, I think that the European Data Protection Board, which is the arm, the kind of central arm of the enforcement, has understood the message, and they have put a lot of emphasis in their work program on developing further what are the shortcomings of making the one-stop shop effective, which is one of the reasons is that we don't have harmonized administrative laws in the member states, and their work that they want to engage on, developing guidelines and having more best practices will definitely increase a better understanding of each other's systems and will also facilitate, in my view, the trust and the mutual cooperation that we need in order to make the one-stop shop efficient. I'm also quite impressed with the recent enforcement decisions that we have seen, in particular by the lead authorities, because there was a little bit of a feeling in the discussion, around the review that, yeah, but these lead authorities, and here we're talking about certain DPAs, which are a little bit, on the spot because they have a lot of big tech, in their member states. I think they have shown, especially over the last couple of months, that they mean it. And what is also refreshing, that the consistency mechanism has helped them to kind of come to the right fines decisions. So I think we're really on a road. And let me make another point. I think if you compare it with other policy areas, and I know this is a lot also in the academic debate around GDPR. If you compare it to competition policy, if you compare it to kind of consumer policy, if you compare it to kind of product safety, health policy, this didn't come overnight. We are a heterogenic system in the EU. We are the biggest single market. We should be proud of that, and we should use the GDPR in that sense. But it takes time to build effective cooperation system. What and this is my final point, I'm very inspired by is that what we have built with the GDPR has been quite an inspiration also for what we developed since then in the context of our digital rule book. If you look at the AI Act, if you look at the DSA, it's very much building on that concept of course, you need to have a harmonized hub, but then you have still a decentralized enforcement for the day-to-day basis for the national cases. So on the cross-border, I think the challenge will be that we show in the coming years that we come more to a common rule book of understanding of the procedures that exist, and that we here and there build on all the kind of things which are in the GDPR. And there's a lot that has been untapped so far: joint investigation, mutual assistance, and really use it to the utmost to show that the one-stop shop can actually deliver the promise to those who believe that we need to do a common harmonized approach in the single market. So I remain a believer in the one-stop shop. Thank you.
Thank you, Renate. Very clear, very passionate, if I can say so. Next, I will go to Wojciech, who clearly the supervisor, and as you all know, also assistant supervisor before that. So an institution of all institutions, if you will, in the field of data protection. Interestingly, there was a sort of provocative title that the EDPS chose for a panel at the CPDP conference at the beginning of this year. That title was Protecting Consumers in the Data Society. It's the enforcement stupid. And that was facilitated under the Digital Clearinghouse, which was launched by the EDPS. And I think the idea behind both the title and the clearinghouse itself, and which indeed is also the position that the EDPS has taken on a lot of new legislative proposals that have been adopted under the current commission, is that the institutional setup for enforcement and collaboration between authorities in different fields, so particularly data protection, competition, and consumer law should be optimized. What do you mean by optimization in this case? What would it look like? And how does optimization of the work between different authorities link to discussions about the one-stop shop?
First of all, let me thank for inviting me here. Most of the questions which are connected with the one-stop shop, these are the questions which on everyday basis are answered by the European Data Protection Board. And I hope that Ventsislav will be dealing with many of them today. But I'm happy that you started from this digital clearinghouse idea that we launched in 2013, in fact, well, the clearinghouse started in 2016. But in 2013-14, we started to talk, I mean, my predecessors, Peter Hastings and Giovanni Buttarelli, we started to talk about the cooperation between the different regulators who have the digital aspects of the digital twins that we create in the internet world. Those regulators approach them from different perspectives and achieved different goals. We tried to find the common platform for this discussion, and we met a kind of enthusiasm among both the data protection authorities, competition authorities, and consumer protection authorities for the general idea of exchanging the experience. That was not that easy when it came to the discussion about the cases that might be at the same time done by the data protection authorities and the competition authorities. And I may say that with the big enthusiasm that we started in 2014, 2016, I had to ask this year in 2021, well, where are the results? Why are we still in this kind of silos approach to the subject? And let me say about the fact, the concerns that we can see on both sides in the consumer protection authorities, competition authorities and the data protection authorities. The data protection authorities sometimes say we are looking objectively on the subject because we are looking from the point of view of fundamental rights, while they accuse the competition authorities of being too practical and going only to efficiently working market, where the whole operation of the market, the pure operation of the market is the main goal, while they claim that they save the fundamental rights. At the same time, the competition authorities often say, please don't take the toys and the tools that we prepared for antitrust and for the competition law in order to enforce something which is different, which is the fundamental right. So we can see that there is even a tension between the authorities which can practically work on the national level. It was shown in Germany. It was shown also in the United Kingdom with the memorandum of understanding that was recently created. But at the same time, to create such a system for all Europe is a big challenge. And that's something which we really wait for from the European Commission. And we sometimes doubt it can be really created in the right way to find the framework for all the regulatory approaches. When you see the new legal acts which are appearing in the drafts that are appearing in the legislative process, Digital Services Act, Digital Market Act, the Data Governance Act, there are additional authorities which are appearing there. And we know that the Commission has the very interesting idea on how this framework may work, and the experience of one-stop shop are to be used in this field. So that is in fact for us the most important subject for the future, how the experience with one-stop shop can help us to find the regulatory framework for the whole digital environment where the data protection authorities will have to fit in.
Very good. Thank you, Wojciech. And you clearly mentioned the EDPB, so I'll go straight to Ventsislav. In a lot of these discussions, clearly there's a lot of focus on the big ticket cases, usually, as Renate said, big tech. But if we look at the numbers, just for last year, the EDPB reported that there were 628 cross-border cases. This is just last year. Roughly a third of which came to draft decisions. And we all know that draft decisions take a lot of time to draft. And roughly 100 of them resulted in final decisions. And that's just last year before we saw some notable decisions that were finalized this year. So what picture of cross-border GDPR enforcement would you say emerges from these numbers?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. Indeed, last year I also participated in this stimulating discussion. First of all, that's for me, it's an indication that the cross-border cases are not dominating in the processing personal data only, because at local level, for example, in Bulgaria, last year we have more than 800 cases on a complaints and more than about 3,000 alerts for false processing of data or infringements in the rights of the individuals. That does not lead to complaints and review in a panel of the local authority. But we have to understand that there are thousands of millions of exchanges every month or every 3 months on a cross-border situation, and 600 cases is an indication that the GDPR is working, because the purpose for the GDPR is not only to have a common framework, but a consistent enforcement. The other thing that I would like to raise now in this roundtable is to what extent this consistent enforcement is effective enforcement. And this is another topic that we have to think about, because the enforcement is in the obligations not of the European Data Protection Board, but of the data protection authorities. And the board cannot supervise them because they are independent in this enforcement capacity. But the enforcement also and its efficiency depends on the local court system, the administrative procedures, but also the review of the administrative procedures by the court system. And if the court system is not effective, then we are not talking about efficiency in the enforcement, and the data subjects and the controllers are not happy because of losing a lot of resources and time in resolving a simple case. But I would say that the one-stop shop is an efficient mechanism compared to the digital market and the digital services that requires processing of huge quantity of data and amount of data. But I would say that it should be an option. It shouldn't be a right. Right now, it is developed in a way that it is right for the controller to point out which data protection authority to be lead authority based on the establishment and so on and so forth. But it's an option. And I think that the legislator, when they developed the law, they've adopted it as an option to help the controller, to save resources, to be more, to shorten the procedure and to be more efficient in protecting of the rights of the data subject. And what happens right now? Because the controller can easily appoint lead supervisory authorities, the resources of these lead supervisory authorities, of course, are not enough to handle that big number of cases in front of one authority or two or three authorities in Europe, compared to the number of cases that are coming and the complexity of the cases, because the numbers are not showing the complexity of that case. If the case concerns millions of users, then the complexity becomes of a very high level compared to the local level cases when we have one or two data subjects complaining about infringement of their rights. So I would say that in the future, we have to think as an option for the one-stop shop. And in this option, the data protection authority that is pointed out and requested to be a lead supervisory authority should have a procedure objectively to reject that request based on a reasoned objection concerning actually commenting their existing resources and availability to handle that cases. Because otherwise, we are now talking, experts are analyzing the length procedures and the number of the cases and the final decisions that are coming from that cooperation procedure. Yeah, they seem very little as a number, but no one is debating about the complexity and the level, the effort of resources that are needed there. So it is, I would say, the board is supporting that mechanism. We are doing our best. We are trying to enhance the cooperation, including expert support within the availability of the mechanisms that we have as the European Data Protection Board. But we have to understand also that even though the GDPR noted there that the governments should provide resources, governments normally provide resources where they see availability, these resources to be returned from, let's say, the imposed fines to the companies back to their budget. They don't provide resources to small data protection authorities, for example, in Slovenia, in Croatia, in Bulgaria, and etc. And so here is the role of the European Commission to try to find a way to analyze how the governments are implementing that provision into the GDPR, and if they find that they fail to do so, to look for other mechanisms to allow the data protection authorities to have consistent resources to deal with that complexity of cases, because the e-privacy is also knocking on our door, and the data protection authorities, like this one that I represent in Bulgaria, has to respond to that request.
Thank you, Ventsislav. Also very clear, and you added some very important elements there that I think the rest of the panel can also comment on. So I'll go to Axel next, one of the leading figures in the parliament from the EPP on data protection and a number of other digital files. You've made no secret of the fact that you think the GDPR needs fixing, so much so that last May you published a paper that's titled Fixing the GDPR. And there you find that even though the one-stop shop mechanism creates forum shopping, and that may come with a few problems there, any problems with the one-stop shop are not related to the law or to flaws in the law, but to a lack of consistent application, and that therefore cooperation and consistency should be used more often as provided under the GDPR. So is this an area where you think overall the GDPR doesn't need fixing because the tools are already there?
Thanks at first to the invitation and also for your question. I still think we are in a kind of a problem of our mind setting so far. I would say we have to acknowledge in a way that a work on digital laws is a permanent one. So this is nothing where I would say, oh, we have once this done in 2018 and then we are doing nothing any longer. Still, we might have a review and then we can move a bit forward. No, this is like a kind 100-meter race. You win the gold medal, but then you're thinking, oh, now I have won this race, I do not have to train my body again. So, and this is where it's totally clear that you are not winning the next race because you are not training your body and your skills any longer. And this is what I think we have to understand. We have to work permanently on digital laws. We have to come back from 150% for data protection to 100%. I would say this is still enough. We have to acknowledge that GDPR has also to do with competition, and we are approaching this so far only from one side. And of course, there we need flexibility, where we need speed. And GDPR, from my point of view, is not any longer about fundamental rights. It's also about wealth and prosperity. It's about competition and also about the question of surviving of the EU in a digital age. Therefore, we are seeing already after 3 years, and also it could have seen also before already, but of course this is in a democratic world also a question of majorities. But we have a lot of some shortcomings, let's say. And one of these is also that we are not having or approaching these with a harmonized way forward, and also in this one-stop shop. We can do more, we can be faster, we can be quicker in solving problems. And just because we are in a competition, and therefore I think also the understanding of data protection administration and competition is not separated any longer. So therefore the one-stop shop has to, in these European common market, has to act more quickly, has to act unity in a way that throughout the EU, we have a kind of one approach of a problem, and this is solved in a way where everybody knows how it goes. And this is a kind of a shortcoming in this aspect. It takes too much time. We are concentrating only on one issue, not on practical issues, not on competition issues. And therefore, I'm asking for more, for being also more flexible, and also for being more open to practical solutions and harmonized solutions also in this one-stop shop area. So they have some tools in place. They have to use it. They have to use it wisely, also in this balance, what I try to describe. But they have to use it also more often. And if this is not working, and so far I would say we do not have really a kind of a common approach or a kind of a harmonized approach on this level. So we are doing this probably in Germany differently than in Ireland or whatever it is. And even in Germany, you're never sure if this has a kind of a united practical way forward. So therefore we have some problems and we need more clarity. We need more using this tool for providing better solutions. So this is the right idea, the one-stop shop, but we should use this in Europe more ambitious at the end. Let me put it this way. And so therefore, I think even if we are in this digital and fast developing area, we also have to always cover these also in these elements of data protection authorities and one-stop shop. And if there is changing something in this digital world, we need to react also in this kind of body. And this is what we are not doing. So, and this is what I'm asking for, and that I'm asking for more openness here. And nobody is interested in having less data protection in place, but we need to be more intelligent to balance it.
Thank you, Axel. Next, I'll go to Ursula, who's Deputy Director General at BEUC, the European Consumer Organization. Needs no introductions. BEUC has written a very in-depth analysis of the one-stop shop, and notably of the experience of BEUC and its national members in using the one-stop shop in one specific case. And in that analysis, you identify in particular the fact that consumers have to deal with foreign administrative law, including in a foreign language as one of the key hurdles that work against consumers. And this was mentioned both by Renate and Ventsislav in their interventions. And clearly, you would like to see solutions to this problem. And in a sense, it's a problem that's perhaps going to be there no matter what, because we will still have 24 official languages in the EU. It's difficult to change that. But from your perspective, are common or at least more aligned administrative procedures the basis to get the one-stop shop right?
Thank you very much, Alberto. Thank you for having the consumer organizations perspective included in this panel. Indeed, we did quite a detailed report based on our own experiences, or better said, our members, our consumer organizations members' experiences with enforcement. But let me maybe first say something which I think is also why this event is very timely and interesting, because I think we see, and it has been mentioned before, that currently the European Union is kind of in search of a good enforcement and governance systems for dealing with all these different aspects of the digital world, so to speak. And so we have the GDPR, and I really think it was a very innovative concept that was put forward here. We have the CPC consumer authorities working together. We now see DSA, we see DMA, we see AI, all with different, kind of slightly different approaches. So to say from consumer perspective, I think the one-stop shop is not the preferred governance systems for some reasons I will explain, but it could work much better. It could really work much better in the way it is in the GDPR. It's just that it has to be put into operation in a much better way. And I think this is really the challenge that we have in front of us. And we would maybe need some flanking measures, if I can say like that, but also some change of attitudes, or also of some DPAs. So if you look at the current problems, if I may say, the one, and I look at it from the perspective of how would it change for consumers if we would enforce the GDPR better? And of course, we look at the number of consumers, and there are some very big cases which are really important, and they are still not solved. There is this problem of the current concentration of important complaints against key big tech players that has led to this bottleneck that we currently see. And we know, of course, that government should give better resources, more resources. They should empower the DPAs better. But in the end, I think we cannot close our eyes in front of the fact that there are a few DPAs who just are not doing the right thing. We know from the recent report of the Irish Council for Civil Liberties that the Irish DPC has not solved 98 major GDPR cases that are in front of it. And that is not good, also not for the other DPAs who are not satisfied, as we know, who see that as a real problem. And also it's not good for consumers, it's not good for smaller companies who very often at the national level indeed are faced with GDPR enforcement. So if I come back very briefly on your question, Alberto, and the situation. So we have 7 of our members have 3 years ago launched a case against Google for the way it deals with the user's location data, right? Very sensitive issues because you can deduct a lot from that. 3 years on, we don't have a decision. And that shows, first of all, that we would indeed need more harmonized administrative procedures. And I think that the EDPB could also start already with guidance and best practices. I know that you cannot change the national laws of the respective countries, but there could be efforts made to make it better and more workable for the complainants. For example, we have seen the DPC took the complaints and started all of a sudden to do an own volition inquiry exactly on the questions of these complaints. And that led to a situation which means no procedural rights for the complainants because they're not part of the own volition. A total kind of delay because they said we'll do first the own volition and then we look into their complaints. And the time of the investigation was not the time when the complaints had been launched, so they started only 1.5 years after. And what happens with that period? Who is going to investigate there? So a lot of questions, and that's where I come to your question, Alberto, because it is true that the one-stop shop, I think it gives advantages to the companies who are headquartered in that country where then the administrative law is applied, but it would not be such a big problem if the DPA would do what it is supposed to do according to the GDPR and would render timely decisions, would involve the other DPAs who are in the country where the consumers launch the complaints, would inform, would support, and would finally do what is supposed to be done under the GDPR and not, for example, use their discretion to do their own volition inquiries with different paths. And again, 3 years later, millions and millions and millions of European consumers are most potentially still exposed to these illegal practices and nothing has happened. So that's really a problem. But let me conclude with a positive note, because I think it's also important to underline that a lot of good things could come out of the cooperation mechanism. We've seen the WhatsApp decision, where due to the other DPAs, we really have a position, finally a decision that I think will make a difference. And then let's not forget that the GDPR also allows for private enforcement, and we will also now have, I look at Renate, the Representative Action Directive, which includes the GDPR. And so there's a lot of support, hopefully coming from the private enforcement side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. Just for everybody's background, we did invite for this discussion both the Irish DPC for their perspective and also CNIL, just to imagine two very different perspectives there. Obviously, we hope that they can accept invitations for future events of ours. We'd be very interested to have them. Change of tack now. I'll go to Gian Claudio for the beginning of our academic session during this panel. Ventsislav in particular mentioned the privacy directive, which is, if you will, the elephant in the room of the one-stop shop mechanism, because there's no one-stop shop mechanism under the current directive. In fact, if there's one thing that industry universally likes about the proposal for a regulation is that it introduces the one-stop shop for e-privacy too. We'll see that the council has adopted finally, after years and years of discussions, its position on the proposed regulation. One of the things they've scrapped is the one-stop shop. So no one-stop shop. The parliament kept it, the EDPB wants it, the EDPS wants it, but clearly there's some dynamics there. So what does this discussion about the privacy regulation and the one-stop shop there tells us about the one-stop shop at large?
Sure, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a great pleasure. I mean, extremely diverse and high-level panel, and thank you for this question. This is, I mean, straight to the point, I guess. I think the famous CNIL case against Google and Amazon of December 2020 is very telling on this matter. So we know the case, right? So CNIL gave great penalties to Google and Amazon for cookie banners. There was not yes or no options. There was yes and more information options. Now, in the decision, there is quite big space for the consistency mechanism and one-stop shop. And I think this is a starting point for the discussion of today that can be linked to many great interventions so far. Both Google and Amazon, in different ways, claim that the case was under the competence of Irish DPA and Luxembourg DPA, for, respectively, and not France. And they use the legal techniques to say that GDPR is lex generalis, e-privacy is lex specialis. No, since in the e-privacy we don't have consistency mechanism. So in the silence of specific rules in the lex specialis, there is an over-application of the lex generalis, which is the GDPR. So they say consistency mechanism should apply to all lex generalis, to all lex specialis, right? Well, the answer that CNIL gave is very legalist and technicist, if I can say, and is for good, I mean, for good reasons. They say there's no silence of lex specialis because member states have implemented the e-privacy directive with national laws and have provided national jurisdiction rules. So we have procedural rules for how to enforce e-privacy and cookie related areas. No? Well, this is a very, and indeed we had Article 82 of the French data protection law. Interestingly, the CNIL mentions also the debate at the European Parliament, at the European Council, as a proof, I mean, the debate that you were mentioning, having the one-stop shop or not in the e-privacy regulation. They mention it as a proof that the GDPR rules on jurisdiction do not apply automatically or silently to e-privacy. Of course, this is just like a way of reasoning. It's not a real proof. Well, I think that beyond any legalism or technicism, there should be clarification, of course. I'm sure businesses want clarification, member states want jurisdiction, and data subjects want protection. It's obvious, but still good to understand the interest on the table. I think there is a solution there. We will have more time to talk about solutions maybe in the second part of the round table. But what is proven unsatisfactory, not to say inadequate, is not the one-stop shop. It is great to have consistency mechanisms for everyone. Maybe it's the selection of the one-stop that has proved problematically. The selection of the first where. So what should be discussed, perhaps, is the lead supervisor authority, not the consistency mechanism structure. Article 56 of the GDPR gives already solution in the exceptions. The Facebook case of the Court of Justice last July gives some interpretative guidelines that we can use. I mean, we don't need big reforms. We can start with that. Of course, in the e-privacy regulation, we need clarification too. And yeah, so I think that the one-stop shop is designed and largely applied with some risk of venue shopping, because of course you can choose, big techs can choose what is the country with better tax systems and also with more lenient DPAs. And this would create a problematic competition between DPAs. We would have you know, and we know that DPAs have political components. In many countries, DPAs are nominated by parliaments, no? So and this is of course the detriment to data subjects and individuals. So of course, it would be great to talk more about the lead authority and to have new framework for that. Of course, this might create fragmentation because Google would have higher standards in France and lower standards in Ireland, for example, if we fragment the lead authority or if we change the rule. I think we will discuss this later. So a solution might be more harmonization and the role of EDPB and EDPS, because they could set the higher standard and they could align the protection to the protection of those high standards. Okay, so I think for it's enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gian Claudio. I also wanted to, I forgot to mention that you started your new role as co-director of the Brussels Privacy Hub at the beginning of this month. So congratulations on that assignment. So I'll continue with the academic section of our panel, and I'll go to Scott, Senior Fellow at Bruegel. And we're very privileged to have Scott because Scott has I think a comparative perspective on data protection that's unlike any of the other speakers, probably because he has been dealing with digital policies and regulation in various fields for years and years. And he's also not, very well versed in policy, but he's also an engineer, which I think most of us on the panel can't say in these discussions. So we're very privileged to have his perspective here. And, having been, witnessing how regulators, particularly in the telecom sphere, have been coordinating on their action on over decades of telecoms regulation. And if you compare that to what has been achieved so far under the GDPR, what the DPAs are doing, how do you think the DPAs are faring compared to most other regulators in other fields?
Well, I think this is a very good and a very key question. As Renate said at the outset, these things typically take a while to settle in. If we look at electronic communications regulation, the basic framework was enacted in 2002. There were major overhauls in 2009 and 2018, which actually only came into force in December of last year. So these mechanisms are complex and they take a while to work out. Now, what we're seeing today is that the same big online platforms that are the topic of most of our discussion today, they're raising a lot of different issues at once. There are competition issues such as killer acquisitions. There are the privacy issues that are our main topic today. There are issues of harmful or misleading content. And of course, they operate over the internet. So there's also questions about how this interacts with telecoms regulation. But increasingly, these are intersecting. I think one of the best examples of that is the German case, the Bundeskartellamt case against Facebook, where privacy and GDPR compliance were a key focus of what essentially was a competition case. And that this opens the question, did the Kartellamt, is it overstepping its boundaries? How do we deal with the intermingling of all of these different themes? But for today, I think a key issue is that each of these domains has a different mechanism for achieving harmonization between the member state level and the European level. In the telecoms world, we have a very well-developed process called, for historical reasons, the Article 7 process, whereby the national authorities make decisions and then those are reviewed, and there's a veto power effectively for most of those decisions at European level. You've got a very different mechanism in GDPR that was chosen to achieve consistency, but also to try to reduce burdens on the firms. You have still other mechanisms proposed for DMA, and of course we have historic mechanisms for competition law deciding, is a merger, let's say, is it to be decided at EU level or at member state level? So this is also well-established practice, but for DMA, a very active debate. Many of you will have seen the non-paper by the Friends of an Effective DMA. This is the German, French, and Netherlands governments, which argues notably that the member states should have a greater involvement, how that works to be defined, a greater involvement in the decisions made at European level. So we've got evolving law and established law in all of these different domains. Now, it's important to remember, there are reasons why these things look different. The large online platforms operate at global level. It would probably lead to great inconsistencies if there were individual regulation at member state level. Telecoms, for example, electronic communications really works rather differently. If I want to buy a broadband service, I care about who offers that service on my street. I, living in Germany, can't order a fixed telecommunication service from Telecom Italia or from Proximus Belgium. So, it means that for there to be primacy of the national member state regulator with review at European level makes sense. There's a reason why these things look different in the different spheres. But I think it raises exactly the questions that you raised earlier with Wojciech, which is, do we run a risk with siloed implementation in each of these different spheres and very little communication between them? Does it lead to mismatches? We haven't seen a great deal of that to date, but I think we run substantial risk of seeing more. I think that the observation either you or Wojciech made about how the UK recently created a council trying to bring together Ofcom, which has regulation both for telecoms and now also for digital services, their financial regulator, the CMA, which is competition, and also their information policy officer, trying to create some dialogue across these different lines can make sense. And this would actually be very much in line, I think, with something that Axel Voss recommended in his very nice GDPR paper from last spring. The argument is that in privacy, while we need independence of the privacy regulators, there are lots of other societal values that don't really get looked at in a balanced way. And essentially trying to create a little more integration, but trying to do that in a way that doesn't invalidate or undermine the process is something that I think requires a lot more thought. Now, I'd also add, there are many people who look at GDPR as sacrosanct. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago where it was referred to as the gold standard that everybody should adapt. I like to point out that gold is precious, but gold is also heavy. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to do further refinement. And again, in each of these spheres, we've seen a period of multiple years of refinement. I'm quite sure that the DMA, I think everybody who's looked at DMA believes it's going to need multiple cycles of refinement. I'm sure the same will be true for the Digital Services Act. GDPR probably needs a little bit of polishing before we go forward. I have other things I could say, but I'll save them for a second round, which hopefully we'll get to.
Thanks a lot, Scott. So last but not least, I'll go to Cecilia from Facebook, our corporate representative on the panel. And it is no secret that one of the criticisms of the one-stop shop is that it favors big tech companies like Facebook, because you go to Ireland, the Irish regulator, as Ursula was saying, consumers are not familiar with Irish law, so it's all easier for you. I'm assuming you disagree with that assessment. So can you expand on the experience that Facebook has had so far with the one-stop shop as you see it?
Thank you very much, Alberto, for the invitation to be in the panel. So I think the single market is the one who benefits from the one-stop shop. And probably some of the speakers who have been speaking before me have actually provided a lot of arguments in this respect. The one-stop shop is, in the idea, seems to try to solve certain shortcomings of the old and fragmented model that existed under the directive. And therefore, any organization that is operating across member states is actually welcoming a system that enables consistency, that enables to carry out a global service on definitely with respect to what the European market is concerned. But this is not only a benefit for the organizations and the economic operators that are dealing with cross-border activities, but also for the data protection authorities and for the individuals, which I think is the main goal of this kind of regulations. If I may borrow the words that say this in a better manner than myself, I will just read one section of the Attorney General Bobek that was saying this beautifully, I think. It says, "The pursuit of a high level of protection of the rights and freedoms of data subject is, in the eyes of the EU legislator, fully in line with the operation of the one-stop shop mechanism illustrated above. By permitting a more coherent, effective, and transparent approach on the matter, the mechanisms of cooperation and consistency set out in the GDPR should contribute towards a stronger emphasis on the promotion and safeguarding of the rights enshrined inter alia in Article 7 and 8 of the Charter." You mentioned that this is something that could be benefiting more the big tech. I think it will benefit, as I mentioned, any organization that is operating cross-border, and that this is not limited to big tech. It is definitely not limited to big tech that could have links also to the United States. And we may think of companies of many other sectors that are based and headquartered in Europe that also benefit from the one-stop shop, and then also the taxpayers' money and the DPAs. And I may mention Philips or BNP Paribas or Unicredit or Aragon or Telefonica. We have AXA, LeasePlan, LVMH, Novartis. I can tell you that any kind of multinational that we have also in Europe is actually welcoming that we have this mechanism that enables to have a consistency application in the European Union. This does not mean that the idea, when put in application, didn't have issues. And I think that some of them have been indicated or illustrated by, I think, all the panelists, and I agree with some of them as well. I think that the lack of European harmonized administrative procedures with respect, I don't know, to admissibility criteria, and also the right to be heard by the economic operators is something that needs to be addressed. There are also, we have seen different approaches regarding what is the role of the lead supervisory authorities and the rest of the concerned supervisory authorities. Some of them have the approach that it should be a primus inter pares, and others consider that it should be the one that should be taking the decisions. And the idea what is an sound and objective objection is something that is not necessarily seen the same way. And I think that Ventsislav was also mentioning something that is very important, that each of the data protection authorities are subject also to their own local systems or public and administrative law, and also the court decisions that could be and should be also be seen in the whole process. Then there is the element also of the resources that has been mentioned by some of you as well. And I will also mention the influence of national politics, the agenda that some of the DPAs may have, and some of them that have been set forward by certain activists. And lastly, I would tend to think that there is something that we have seen, lastly, with respect to the trust and the respect, the institutional respect that each of the DPAs should have for each other. This kind of mutual recognition and mutual trust that definitely I think that there is some room for improvement. I would love to have a one-stop shop that is delivering what is under the idea, from my point of view, that is under the GDPR, in which we have a genuine EU-wide enforcement culture that is respectful of the principle of due process, that is proportionate, but that is also accountable for the economic and social impact of the data protection decisions, which is something that I think was in the idea what Scott was saying, and also Gian Claudio. Data protection, and also Axel when we were thinking about how to get prepared, let's say, for the future. Data protection does not live in isolation, and therefore the decisions that are taken from a point of view, even if you do not, and you should not go out of the boundaries of what is the goal of the regulation that you need to enforce, and the tools that your regulations has provided, to have, let's say, a holistic approach in the sense of understanding the results that these privacy decisions may have in the economic and social arena. I think this will be something in which everybody will be benefited from, not only some actors.
Thank you, Cecilia. You referred to Scott and Axel, among others. I'm going to go to Axel maybe. And I noticed you made a plea effectively last March in plenary to Commissioner Renders, talking about the Europe needing to survive digitally. And if you want to do that, you said that the Commission should not just be doing what you called good preparatory work with the data strategy, but should also show actual courage, determination, and purposefulness in improving and modernizing the GDPR. So you sort of mentioned some of the ways that you would like the GDPR improved. But do you think that the discussions, most of the discussions about GDPR that we see, maybe I'm simplifying, but they are about the one-stop shop, the big ticket cases. Do you think that they are, in a sense, distracting us from like the content provisions of the GDPR? And maybe I could add also the other pieces of law in the data strategy that are supposed to work together and improve things for both, again, businesses and consumers.
Sorry. Yes, I think new laws are distracting the situation because you are then getting more far away from the problem itself. And that's why then politically this is used then in saying, oh, let's wait, it's just a short time. And now we are coming with this one. And then it takes another time instead of precisely going to the problem and solving it. It would be probably better. And even I'm not sure if we're coming now with new law elements like the Data Governance Act or the Data Act, what you have said already, if this is not complicating the situation for the one-stop shop once again, and this is the more complicating dealing with all the data issues at the end. So, and of course, probably you can't really reconstruct then the one-stop shop in a way that they are acting faster if you are not going directly to the GDPR. And that's why, yes, the new laws might be a kind of a good benefit also in trying, although we have a GDPR, getting some data. It's also kind of a controversial idea, but if we need this now, then it might be has a kind of a good effect. But if this is really kind of improving the one-stop shop, I'm doubting this very much. So therefore, we should concentrate on what is the gap or the lack of these, and then we should fix it as soon as possible in trying to come forward and also meeting more the future than what we are doing right now. And this is what I would ask for. So new laws are also probably necessary, but it won't fix the process of the one-stop shop.
Thank you, Axel. I'm going to ask a follow-up question to both Renate and Ursula. It's the same questions, and I'd be interested to understand, to hear from both of you, because one other aspect, and I think we discussed this already, but the review from last year also highlighted that there was some notable cross-border decisions involving, again, big tech that were still pending in the one-stop shop and the consistency mechanism, and that once adopted, those decisions will have a substantial impact on individuals' rights in many member states. how much do you think we will still need to talk about the one-stop shop once those decisions, all of them, are finalized? Renate, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to do. Well, I think we are in the kind of making of the enforcement narrative of the GDPR. So in that regard, these big decisions that are still pending will, of course, clarify further the individual rights of all in the single market, and that is, of course, an important aspect. I think we heard in the discussion quite a lot that the one-stop shop needs to be improved. It needs to be, we need to polish the kind of the GDPR. I like that kind of expression to kind of show that we are working with it. And also the challenge that was also mentioned by some speakers, that there is a governance building, governance structure building in the making because of digital rulebook in the broader sense that we are putting together, again in a very pioneering way. I mean, that's also I would not kind of say it has to be the gold standard and everybody has to do it tell, but let's also not forget that with the GDPR, with what we are doing with the DMA, with the DSA, with the AI Act, I mean, the EU is good at showing that we can be rule makers instead of rule takers, and I really want us to be much more in that position rather than the other, because there is out there in this kind of digital kind of transition quite a competition on what approach to take, and the approach that we've been taking with the GDPR and with the other pieces is foremost an approach that is human-centric and that puts the individual rights at the center of it. And I think that's an important element that we should show. And I think that's also why it was important to have the GDPR first and then to build these other pieces of legislation. So I don't think we got it wrong with the GDPR, because we needed to kind of clarify how this individual right in the charter, in the treaty, confirmed by our European Court jurisprudence, can be translated in this digital transformation. For me, the real question, and we are, running around it a bit in this debate, is maybe not the one-stop shop in the long run, but it's more a fundamental question of what kind of enforcement structure do we want in this kind of digital transition? Is it something that is more a central-based enforcement structure? So, i.e., give Brussels more power in this, or do we continue with the decentralized? I was already involved in the making of the GDPR proposal, and we had this discussion, of course, should we have, a centralized approach? And I find it very interesting to see right now in the DSA debates, DMA was mentioned, but interesting in the DSA debate and the run-up to the hopefully kind of Competitiveness Council now in November to confirm the general approach, that you have actually more appetite for a more centralized approach, building also on the experience with the GDPR. And I would dare, looking a little bit on my daily work in the broader kind of, mutual trust field, I think it's also an expression of where we are in Europe in terms of, do we trust each other? Do we trust each other agencies? I've heard a lot about DPAs are political. I find this not very inspiring to hear. And I find it very worrying that in this panel of experts, we say that DPAs are politically kind of, steered. They are independent. They are supposed to be independent. So I think this is probably the real debate in the future, whether if we can't show that with this concept of decentralized, because it is still a decentralized enforcement of the GDPR that we decided for together in the final trilogues for good reasons, whether that can survive, if we, on the other hand, cannot find enough responses to the issues of mutual trust, effective, harmonized implementation. So I think it's really an evolution linked to the broader, rulemaking that we do, but also to the broader mutual trust issue that we currently have in the EU.
Thank you, Renate. Ursula, do you have a reaction to the very same question as Renate?
Yeah. Thank you, Alberto. I think your question was whether we will still discuss so much about the one-stop shop if the big cases would be resolved. And there, I have to say, first of all, why do we talk about this so much? It's not because of the system as such. It is because of the companies that do not respect the GDPR. And there are so many complaints and there are so many big cases because there is so much big non-compliance. So let me just put that forefront. So it will, of course, also depend on how how the companies will behave. And then I have to also say, it sounds a bit strange that Facebook puts so much focus on highlighting how much the companies in other sectors benefit from the one-stop shop, when we know that it's particularly big tech and maybe also Facebook in particular, who has benefited so far from the way the one-stop shop has not been applied in the right way. And civil society organizations have very much been on the forefront to defend the data subjects, right, in that respect, and trying very, very hard to make the GDPR something that finally is going to work. I would just like to say that also. And let me just give you another example, because we're talking a lot about interdisciplinary enforcement and, you know, how these laws merge, if I can put it like that, and how also maybe the enforcement structures need somehow to be clearer about how they relate to each other. We have launched a case against TikTok recently, and we alerted the consumer authorities, because we have standing there to alert them. We alerted the data protection authorities, and we alerted the audiovisual media services, ERGA, the network of them. And all of them have very different systems in place. But just to say, we discovered that for video sharing platforms where there is a particular obligation to protect young consumers, to protect children from inappropriate content, this is very interesting, I'm sure, for Facebook, that Ireland has not transposed the review directive. And there is no law in place that would include that new obligations, and there is no authority in place that would make enforcement possible. And we have spoken to ERGA, and we have spoken to the Irish broadcasting actually authority, the old one, and they say, sorry, there is nothing, we cannot act, you have to wait. So this is currently the situation that European consumers, European children face, because there is one authority who does not act and nobody seems to care, and we cannot do anything about it. I think we should talk about that type of situation when we continue to discuss about what type of enforcement mechanism do we need, because we have in the DSA like 1/3 of the whole proposal is about the enforcement structure. And it's really hard to digest and understand how this is going to work. So I think we have to be more serious, and we have to be more united with all different levels of who is involved in enforcement about making this work to really be credible on what we're doing here in Europe for a trusted digital environment. Thanks.
Thank you, Ursula. And you also give me the opportunity to give Cecilia directly the opportunity to react immediately. I guess the big question, and Renate was sort of hinting at that, and I'll come back to decentralized, centralized later as well. But, you know, most of the attacks are on the Irish DPC and big tech, regulated by the Irish DPC. So wouldn't it be easier for Facebook if you guys just accepted that, why don't we have a European regulator take care of everything? Wouldn't that make everybody happy?
I think that there will be no system that will ever be considered appropriate. We are going to be criticized no matter why. So if for those who have the goal to destroy Facebook, and even if it's at the price to disregard any rule of due process, I don't know which will be the system that will be appropriate, the one that we have now or others that could be an alternative. I think that the duty or the goal is not to make everyone happy. The duty is to have a system that meets the different requirements that I think we all agree with, that you have something that enables a harmonization and to have a European single market, that enables to have predictability and to have legal certainty and to have due process, to have an efficient use of the resources by the DPAs, which at the end of the day enables to have a better protection for the individuals and to have a better use also of the taxpayers' money, and to have also accountability with respect to economic and social impact of the decisions that we have in the different fields. This is what we should be aiming for, irrespective of which is the kind of company in which you are working, because at the end of the day, we are building a market, that we are building prosperity, and we are building prosperity in accordance to a certain kind of values that we are very proud of as Europeans. And the GDPR is one of reflecting one of these important approaches. I think that the one-stop shop was built with this aim, and in practice, it welcomes improvements that requires, as we have been seeing, predictability and transparency, respect among the institutions, and fairness. In any event, I think also that there is another dimension when we think about the regulator. Regulator is not only a machine of imposing fines. A regulator has other kind of tools as well in order to use it for the protection of, in this case, data protection rights or other rights if it is other individuals. But in the case of DPAs, they have a very important role with respect to issuing guidelines, with respect to also having done in sectoral inspection, that this is something that I have seen in my home country long time ago and that it has been abandoned. They have a rule also to facilitate codes of conduct. This is something also that in certain, not a lot of member states, but this is a work that has been undertaken as well. We have, I think, some possibilities in the GDPR with respect to certifications that have not yet been, we have the potential there, and it's not an easy task, but I think that definitely the data protection authorities and economic operators have a room to do also there, and they are also on these sandboxes or other kind of innovative ways, let's say, of testing in environments, the new technologies in how we are dealing with this human-centric approach. So don't think only as a regulator as the one imposing fines. A regulator, I think, has the power and the beauty as well to do a lot with respect to different tools in order to get this goal that we have, that is to have prosperity with this human-centric approach.
Thank you, Cecilia. Next, I'll go to Wojciech, who I saw was nodding feverishly while Renate was speaking. And we know, because of a leak in the press or maybe a breach, depending on how you want to look at it, that the EDPS is planning to convene a public discussion on the GDPR enforcement model next year. And you are planning to discuss potential future scenarios, and we know there's this big discussion about centralization, decentralization. I can't help but think whenever we have that discussion about 2 consecutive attempts at European level to harmonize a spectrum, the way that spectrum is auctioned in the member states, and maybe Scott is going to expand on that in that example. It didn't go very well. So now, particularly given what you said, the fact that there's different national approaches among the DPAs, but there's also other authorities involved in these discussions. How much of a consensus do you think you can reach at the event next year to address future models of GDPR enforcement?
Well, thank you for this question. Well, definitely that was not the document that leaked, because that was the document which was distributed both to the all data protection authorities, but also to the in the commission. We used it for the meetings with the commissioners before. So yes, we were clear that we want to discuss about the future of privacy and future of data protection law, and we want to do it next year in 2022. Which also shows that we are not talking about the immediate fast changes to be done at the moment in the system that exists. We are rather thinking about how can we summarize not only 4 years of having GDPR working, but actually 10 years that we are discussing about it, because on 25th of January 2022, we will have the 10th anniversary of the draft of the GDPR. So the revealing of the one-stop shop system, And while I'm not in the big fan of permanent change that was somehow called by Axel, because I think that this is not only from the data protection authorities point of view, but especially from the market point of view, that makes incredible instability. I think that the 10 years is a good time to find out how it looks like, how it works, how the people did it in the other systems, how the other systems develop. Well, Scott was talking about the UK example. One of the things to look at, they had the system of one-stop shop, they used it, and now they are trying to create their own approach to the subject. We have the experience that is done on the global privacy assembly level with the cross-border enforcement cooperation. So remembering that the definition of hell by one of the big companies some years ago was the European law with American enforcement. We are not going to create the hell, definitely, but we are going to find out how the enforcement can learn from the experiences that were here. I know that when Renate was speaking, because I was also taking part in the preparation of GDPR, and also this discussion about centralized or decentralized model. Being at this time, the person who was looking at this from the European perspective, but from the national level, because I was the commissioner for data protection in my country of origin. And I just came back to the program, to the agenda of the first conference we organized in 2012 on GDPR and on possible problems that we will have with GDPR. And what did I see in the program? The 15 points which we took into consideration. The point number one was the administrative procedures. Will it work? The second point was the fines. Will it work? Because we didn't have this experience in my country of origin. So there were the problems that we were discussing about at this time. And now we have to consider not only them, how they were solved, but also the other problems that may arise. So I'm not surprised that this discussion will be coming back and that we will be doing it in the nearest future, remembering that there are still the process is going on. As it was said, we still don't have the enforcement done on the level of the national authorities, but we don't have the judicial review done either. So this is still the part of the process to be seen. I'm waiting for that even more interested in than to the certification, which I don't give the big chances myself, or to the codes of conduct, where we have the good examples, especially on the national level, as Cecilia said, but we don't have these good examples on the international level. We have the first codes which are dealing with the cloud. But if I look at the experience of the pharmaceutical industry, I start to be doubtful. I don't want to talk too long, but I would only say 10 years of discussion about the one-stop shop and the practice makes the very good time to look ahead and to find out how the next decade of this discussion will look like. We want to start this discussion here. Otherwise, the gold standard of GDPR will be turned into Tombak standard that will come from the other areas of the world, probably the same one where the Tombak is coming from.
Thank you, Wojciech. We're approaching, unfortunately, the end of our panel. So I'm going to ask two final questions, and I'm going to ask that the responses be very as short as possible. I'm going to go to Ventsislav just to stay on the current scenario before we start discussing, long term, because we have started to see, as Renate was saying, in the past few months, really, probably a change of pace, perhaps quality in how GDPR enforcement and consistency mechanism have been used. We saw the draft guidelines on legally binding decisions in case of relevant to reasoned objections. And we have seen a very notable dispute resolution, a decision, as well as the first urgent binding decision from the EDPB last July. So would you agree, are you hopeful that these are very good signs of how the current scenario can be enforced?
Well, from that perspective, I would say that the board is trying within the capacity that the board has, not only to deal with the quality, but to deal with what I initially did try to explain, effective and efficient implementation of the regulation, which is much more important for the data subject, but also for the controllers. Now here we are talking about that we did try to determine what a reasoned objection is for the concerned authorities, because of the fact that you said very few of the final decisions of all these 600, 700 cases opened in front of by the elite authorities on the one-stop shop procedure are finalized. Well, they are finalized in a very long period of time, and the data subjects does not receive the impression that their rights are protected, because if you have a long period of enforcement, then the data subject is not convinced that this authority is independent and efficient in order to protect their rights. The same is with the controllers, because the controllers want at least to have a situation where they have to know what to do and how to do it based on the certain case, because they also have an interest, their business, to be correct, transparent, and accountable, because they earn money from that. And if there is a kind of a black hole into this situation, this is not good for their business as well. So from that perspective, we want these concerned authorities to get out of their box case, because they are more or less concerned about the rights of the data subjects at their local level. For example, whether it would be in Bulgaria or in Germany, in Poland, etc. And most of their questions are into this kind of procedure are concerned about the specificity of the local case that they actually supplemented to the overall review of the lead authority. And so that was also the reason, in addition to the quality, to expedite the procedure. And at the end, to have a kind of a control, if we can say control, on the lead authority, whether when they issue the final decision, including the proportionality of the fine, because the idea is of the fine is to have a preventive effect. And so the board here and all data protection authorities are concerned of the prevention. Once the prevention is effective, that will lead to a quality of service. And so that was the reason why we acted this way. And supporting the lead authorities with the experts whenever investigations and enforcement activities have significant common interest, because of the fact that they lack resources. And I've already raised this issue, and you as an expert here dealing within this specific topic know it very well.
Thank you, Ventsislav. I have one last question. I think this can go both to Scott and Gian Claudio. I think we've gone through this, and I think Wojciech and Renate in particular have expanded on the fact that clearly there's different dimensions, several different dimensions to digital files, and data protection is one of them. But we have not only other existing regulatory authorities that deal with those issues, but also new files. So new legislative proposals that deal with those issues, and we also have institutional discussions there. And the big question and the idea behind the clearinghouse, as Wojciech explained, is that clearly there's need to coordinate more among these different authorities and these different laws. Does it look to you like it's working, or it can work, or are we heading toward a situation where, because at the end of the day we're multiplying regulation and we're multiplying authorities, we're bound to have double enforcement, potentially conflicts, and still tugs of war between authorities? How's that looking to you right now? Scott, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, no easy answers for that. I do see, as for example, with the Bundeskartellamt case that I mentioned before, there's certainly a risk of collision of these different spheres. I don't think it's been too bad, but I think it's a definite risk. The concern that I have is that the GDPR, I see as a relatively brittle structure, and also because privacy is a human right. It gives the courts relatively little room for maneuver. I think we saw that, for example, in both Schrem's decisions, and also in trying to create a new privacy shield. So what I wonder in consequence is, even if we had a council, how would that actually influence decisions without running into outright conflict? Now, we divide these things up into different legal instruments for good reasons. It's because of different problems, and if we don't apply some kind of divide and conquer strategy, we won't be able to do anything, and we risk undermining the legitimacy and the independence of the process. So, so it's not an easy problem at all. If you don't mind my diverging for just a second, I'd like to point out that I agree with much of what's been said and what Axel has said. The fundamental problem that we have here is with implementation and enforcement. But I think the fix may have to be legislative, and it's because of something that we've sort of hinted at in much of the previous discussion, but haven't said in so many words. A lot of the digital platforms have consolidated their headquarters, their controller, into a small number of member states, especially Ireland, largely because of tax competition, but also partly because of regulatory competition. And, you know, I work as an engineer, but I also work as an economist. I do most of my work as an economist. I see an incentives problem. For a member state that benefits from having a lot of these corporate headquarters located there, you know, even if there's no overt political interference with the process, what motivates the national lead supervisory authority to be really fast and really aggressive in regulating online platforms that could choose to put some of their investment elsewhere? And more notably, when we talk about resourcing, what motivates a national government to apply lots of funding to a data protection authority that, you know, it's not a profit center, it's a cost center mostly, or should be anyway. What motivates them to do something that may not be perceived as being in the national interest? I don't think that you easily fix that just through better enforcement. I think we need maybe some rethinking on the overall mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Claudio.
Just complimenting on this, I totally agree on this last point. And I think that a key thing, as I was saying before, is to reconsider the lead authority. I think we should go from a country of main establishment principle to a country of impact principle. It's already there. Article 56, paragraph 2 of the GDPR, as interpreted by the Court of Justice a few months ago, already highlights that the exceptions to the lead authority is also substantially affecting data subjects. There is a list, Working Party Opinion 2017, Article 29 Working Party Opinion 2017, lists what substantial influence affecting data subject means. There is a list of 10 indexes. The first is likely to cause damage or loss or distress to individuals. The second is individuals' health, well-being, or peace of mind, affecting individuals' financial or economic status. It's already there. If you are Facebook and you influence substantially French citizens, well, there might be this except, of course, you should inform the lead authority and the lead authority should not act. But I think it's already there. Axel was saying we don't need new laws. Yes, just read the details of the existing law. Let's read the Court of Justice and let's move from the country of region to the country of impact, I would say. And of course, also the main issue, of course, over-regulation is a burden. I think that if we focus on impact, so what's our priority in citizens? The impact on citizens. If we look at the impact, then other tools are all complementary. Competition law, data protection, etc. But we should have a clear understanding of what's the relevant impact on individuals. Of course, it's a long discussion again. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. If I could be a bit facetious based on what you said, I'm sure that the German authorities will be very pleased to let the CNIL do everything, because there's always going to be more French users than any users in any of the German lenders. But I'll close on that note, if I can be facetious again, just to thank this amazing panel that we've had. I think for 1.5 hours, we've covered a lot of ground. We have, again, tremendous input from all the speakers. I can only hope that we can do this again. This was the second installment of our GDPR series, and we hope to be doing this again. Hopefully, like I said, we will have some of the national authorities in addition to Ventsislav, who's been very graciously joining us. So thank you all, and hopefully we'll have another event soon. Thanks a lot.